Chapter 1. The week everything I built began to fall. I was supposed to walk onto that graduation stage as valedictorian, but instead I was being investigated for cheating, while my best friend was crying in the hallway, telling everyone I betrayed her. One anonymous email, one stolen file, and 5 years of trust collapsed overnight. I'm Naomi, and this isn't a story about losing a title. It's about what happens when you stay silent long enough for the truth to speak for you. I still remember the feeling of that week, as if my body sensed something my mind refused to name. The last week of April 2025 at Ridgeway State University felt lighter than the months before it. The campus in Pennsylvania was just starting to bloom. Trees along the main quad were finally green again, and students lingered outside longer than usual, as if we were all collectively stalling the moment adulthood officially began. Everything in my life felt aligned. Not perfect, just steady. I was finishing my senior year with a GPA of 3.96. I had never chased the word valedictorian out loud, but when advisors started nodding a little longer during meetings, when professors smiled in that knowing way, I understood what was coming. It felt earned, not flashy, like a quiet confirmation that the discipline, the late nights, the careful choices had added up to something. I had learned early not to celebrate too loudly. My parents divorced in 2016, and by 2018 I was living full-time with my mom, Evelyn Carter, in a small apartment off campus. Stability for me had always meant not tempting fate, so I moved through that week calmly, attending classes, finishing final projects, answering emails about graduation logistics, telling myself that everything was on track. Lydia Moore was part of that picture. She had been for 5 years. We met during orientation in 2021, two nervous freshmen clutching campus maps and pretending we knew where we were going. We studied together, complained together, survived online exams, and reopened classrooms together. We shared Google Drive folders, color-coded notes, long FaceTime calls before midterms. I explained concepts to her often, not because I thought I was smarter, but because teaching helped me understand too. I never saw it as competition. Lydia was my friend. That was the category she lived in, nothing else. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a reminder about library fines and a spammy internship newsletter. It was from the Office of Academic Integrity. The subject line was neutral, almost polite. Request for a meeting regarding Statistics 2 assessment. I read it twice, then a third time. There was no accusation, just a request. I felt a flicker of annoyance more than fear. Statistics 2 had been difficult, but I had taken the exam honestly. I closed my laptop, grabbed my backpack, and walked across campus thinking this would be a formality, a misunderstanding cleared up in 10 minutes. The meeting itself was brief. Too brief. A staff member explained there had been a concern raised about irregularities related to the online exam. They used careful language, alleged similarities, timing anomalies, pending review. I nodded, answered questions, explained my study process. I was calm because I believed the truth was enough. It was when I stepped back into the hallway that something shifted. People looked at me differently. Not everyone, but enough. Conversations paused. A girl I had worked with on a group project glanced away when our eyes met. I heard a whisper behind me, something about online cheating, said quietly, but not quietly enough. The words stuck to me like static. I walked toward the student lounge, my chest tight now, and that was when I saw Lydia. She was sitting on the arm of a couch, surrounded by 3 students from our major. Her shoulders were hunched, her hands shaking as she spoke. Tears ran down her face. I stopped without meaning to, half hidden behind a column. She said she could not believe it. She said she felt betrayed. She said she never imagined Naomi would do something like that. She spoke about trust, about integrity, about how hard it was to watch someone you care about make such a choice. No one noticed me standing there. No one noticed my hands going cold. What stunned me was not the content, it was the detail. Lydia described a specific method of cheating, a stress response, a way of rationalizing pressure that mirrored something I had once said to her late at night, months earlier, when I was exhausted and venting about academic expectations. A private confession of fear, not action, something only she could know. I waited for her to look up. She did not. I waited for myself to feel angry enough to step forward. I did not. I turned and walked away. My phone buzzed twice, a text from a classmate asking if everything was okay, another from someone I barely knew, carefully phrased, asking if the rumors were true. I did not answer either. By the time I left campus, the air felt heavier. I replayed the scene in my head, not with disbelief anymore, but with a growing clarity. Lydia had not just reacted to something that happened, she had prepared for it. When I got home, my mom was at the kitchen table with her laptop open, glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up immediately, the way she always did, reading my face before I spoke. "Something happened," she said. I sat down across from her. I told her about the email, about the meeting, about the hallway, about Lydia. My mom listened without interrupting. When she finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "This is not random," she said quietly. That was the moment it settled in. Not panic, not rage, recognition. Whatever was happening had been set in motion before I ever read that email, and for the first time since the week began, I allowed myself to admit it. The ground under my feet was shifting, and it was not by accident. Chapter 2. Silence looked like guilt. By the next morning, the shift was no longer subtle. It was official. I opened my student portal before class, the same way I had done every day for 4 years, and saw the update before anyone had to tell me. My name was gone from the preliminary list of graduation honors. No announcements, no explanation, just absence. The space where my name had been felt louder than any accusation. I closed the tab slowly and sat there for a long moment, listening to the hum of my laptop fan and the muffled sounds of my mom getting ready for work in the other room. I told myself this was procedural, temporary, neutral, but my body reacted before my logic could catch up. My shoulders tightened, my stomach sank. Silence, I was learning, had weight. Campus felt different that day. Not hostile, not openly cruel, just cautious. Conversations stopped when I walked past. People who used to wave nodded instead, eyes flicking away too quickly. I could almost feel the question hovering around me, the same one repeating in different minds. What if it was true? Jacob Ellis was the first person who stopped pretending. He caught up to me outside the statistics building after lecture. Jacob and I had worked together before. He had always been easy to talk to, the kind of guy who asked smart questions and laughed at his own mistakes. That day, his smile did not reach his eyes. He asked if we could talk. I said yes. We stood off to the side near the bike racks, students passing us in both directions. Jacob did not waste time. He asked if I had found a workaround for the online exam. He said he just needed to know. He said it mattered because people were talking. I remember noticing how carefully he chose his words, how he framed it as concern rather than accusation, but the implication was the same. I told him that if I had done something wrong, the investigation would show it, and if I had not, the truth would show that too. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself with details. I did not ask him to believe me. Jacob nodded slowly. He said he hoped it worked out. Then he walked away. That exchange followed me for the rest of the day, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. This was how reputations eroded, not in explosions, but in careful questions and quiet distance. By the end of the week, the consequences became tangible. I received an email informing me that my participation in the cognitive research group was being paused pending the outcome of the review. Another message followed from the career office, politely informing me that my summer internship placement was no longer guaranteed. They used the word postponed. I knew what it meant. Each message was professional. Each one framed the decision as precautionary. Together, they formed a pattern. I was no longer a safe bet. At home, my mom noticed the changes before I said anything. She always did. That evening, she poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from me at the small kitchen table. I told her about Jacob, about the research group, about the internship. She listened the way she always did when numbers stopped mattering and principles took over. Then she told me about 2019. I had known the outline of the story, but not the details. She had been accused of altering financial records at the hospital where she worked. It had started with a rumor, then an anonymous complaint. She had been suspended during the review. People she had trained stopped returning her emails. Others avoided her entirely. She told me she wanted to scream, to defend herself immediately, to demand apologies. Instead, she documented everything. She let the audit run its course. She did not argue with opinions. She answered questions. She waited. When the investigation cleared her, the same people who had avoided her suddenly remembered her kindness. My mom looked at me and said that the hardest part was resisting the urge to react emotionally, because once you do, you give up the only thing that keeps you credible. That night, I started working. I pulled up every shared folder, every draft, every version history tied to my statistics coursework. I laid out my calendar, classes, work shifts, study sessions. I did not assume anything yet. I just gathered facts. Professor Daniel Whitman noticed me staying after class the next day. He did not ask about the investigation directly. He asked if I had questions about version control. In his office, he explained how timestamps worked, how edits were logged, how access could be traced without accusation. He did not promise to help me. He did not need to. He gave me the tools and left the conclusions to me. I spent hours cross-referencing timelines, late nights at the kitchen table while my mom slept, early mornings before class. I treated it like any other problem. Define variables, eliminate noise, look for inconsistencies. The first real crack appeared on Thursday. One of the assignment files, a practice problem set labeled with my name, showed an edit made during a time I could not have been at my computer. I checked my work schedule to be sure. I had been clocked in at my part-time job across town. The edit was not minor. It altered formatting and content. I traced the editor account. It was Lydia. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Part of me wanted it to be a mistake, a glitch, anything that did not confirm what my instincts had already begun to accept. But data did not lie, and this was not accidental access. This was deliberate. I did not confront her. Instead, I saved the logs. I documented everything. I followed the process exactly as outlined in the university policy. I submitted nothing yet. I waited. Later that afternoon, I heard the update through a class group chat before it reached me officially. Lydia Moore had been named the temporary valedictorian, pending the investigation. She would begin preparing the graduation address. I imagined her standing at the podium, practicing words meant for me, words about integrity, about perseverance, about truth. I closed the chat without responding. That night, I sat on my bed and looked around my room, the posters I had never taken down, the textbooks stacked by the wall, the life I had built piece by piece, quietly, patiently. I could have fought louder. I could have demanded immediate correction, but something in me understood that timing mattered. So I did nothing. And in that silence, the truth continued to organize itself. Chapter 3. She didn't want me to fail. Understanding what Lydia did required me to look backward instead of forward. Once I stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding, memories rearranged themselves. Small moments I had dismissed as stress or insecurity took on sharper edges. Lydia had always smiled when I succeeded, but there was often a delay, a fraction of a second where something else crossed her face first. I used to think it was exhaustion. Now I wondered if it had been calculation. She talked often about her parents, about expectations, about how nothing was ever enough. Her older cousin was a lawyer. Her younger sister was already publishing research. Lydia learned early that praise was conditional. Being good was not enough. You had to be better than someone else. For years, that someone had quietly become me. I thought of study sessions where she would ask how I understood a concept, then repeat my explanation later as if it were her own. I remembered jokes that landed a little too close to accusation. Must be nice to always get it right. You make the rest of us look bad. I had laughed those comments off. I thought friendship was flexible enough to absorb envy. It turns out, envy does not disappear. It just waits. Rachel Kim confirmed what my instincts had already begun to accept. Rachel was a journalism student, the kind who noticed patterns and stored details the way other people stored playlists. We were not close friends, but we had overlapping circles. She asked if we could talk after class one afternoon. Her voice was careful. We sat outside the student union, the air warm, final stress hanging over everyone like static. Rachel hesitated, then said she was not sure if she should tell me something. She told me about a gathering the week before the investigation began. Lydia had been there. A few students from our major were talking about graduation honors. Someone joked about how predictable it was that my name would be called. Rachel said Lydia laughed, then said something quietly, almost casually. If Naomi disappears, everything opens up. Rachel looked at me as she repeated it. She said the room went silent for a second, then someone changed the subject. Lydia smiled like she had said nothing unusual. It was not evidence, it was not something I could submit to anyone, but it was motive laid bare. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, weighing two paths. I could file a complaint immediately. I had enough data to raise serious questions. I could force the issue and demand action. It would be faster. It might even work. Or I could wait. Waiting meant enduring suspicion longer. It meant accepting the risk that the damage would deepen before it reversed. It meant trusting a system that did not always reward patience. But it also meant preserving something I could not get back once it was gone, my credibility. I chose to wait. The meeting with Dr. Helen Brooks was scheduled for the following Monday. She was the Dean of Academic Integrity, a title that carried weight precisely because she did not use it theatrically. Her office was quiet, neutral, diplomas on the wall, plants near the window. She invited me to sit and asked me to explain my process, not my feelings. I laid out my timeline, my study schedule, my work hours, the shared access history. I did not accuse Lydia. I did not speculate about motives. I showed facts and let silence do its work. Dr. Brooks listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded and asked a few clarifying questions, technical ones, specific ones. Then she said something that shifted the room. The anonymous report that triggered the investigation was sent from a campus network associated with Lydia Moore's residence hall. She said it calmly, as if she were reading a weather update. She did not say Lydia's name with accusation. She said it as part of a process. The investigation would expand. Access logs would be reviewed. Interviews would be conducted. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like balance returning. As I stood to leave, Dr. Brooks looked at me and said one more thing. You did the right thing by not escalating emotionally. It makes the facts easier to hear. I thanked her and walked out. Outside, students were gathering for graduation photos, caps, gowns, families visiting early, life moving forward without waiting for resolution.
Later that week, an email went out about the graduation rehearsal. Lydia's name was listed as the speaker for the valedictorian address. Mine was not. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then closed it. I did not attend rehearsal. Instead, I went to work. I finished my final assignments, I met deadlines, I kept my voice steady in group settings, I answered questions politely and briefly. People watched me, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. I let them. At home, my mom asked if I was okay. I told her I was choosing patience. She nodded like she understood exactly what that cost. By the end of the week, the pieces were no longer scattered. They were aligned, not complete, but coherent. Whatever happened next would not be decided by who spoke the loudest or cried the hardest. It would be decided by what could be proven.
Chapter 4. The Truth Didn't Need My Voice. The morning of graduation arrived without drama, which felt almost ironic after everything that had led up to it. I woke early, before my alarm, the room washed in pale light. My cap and gown hung on the back of the chair, untouched. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if rushing might invite something to go wrong. My mom was already awake, dressed and quiet, moving through the kitchen with a focus that told me she was holding her emotions in check for my sake. The drive to campus was calm. Families lined the sidewalks near the auditorium, parents adjusting cords, siblings taking photos, laughter spilling out in bursts. No one looked at me twice. No one knew what might happen in the next hour. Inside the hall, the air felt thick with ceremony. Rows of chairs stretched toward the stage, each seat marked with a program. Music played softly while graduates filtered in, a low hum of excitement and nerves. I found my assigned spot among the students, not near the front, not set apart in any way, just another senior in a blue gown. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. Lydia was several rows ahead of me. I recognized her posture immediately. Straight spine, chin lifted, the body language of someone ready to be seen. She did not turn around. I wondered if she knew yet. The ceremony began on time. Speeches followed the expected order. Introductions, a welcome from the university president, applause that came easily, automatically. When the master of ceremonies announced the valedictorian address, a ripple moved through the room. Parents leaned forward, phones lifted. Lydia stood. She stepped onto the stage with practiced ease, holding her notes with both hands. She paused at the podium, smiling out to the crowd, breathing in the moment she had prepared for. Before she could speak, another figure approached the microphone. Dr. Helen Brooks. She moved without urgency, her presence quiet but unmistakable. The room settled as she reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. She said she needed to address a brief update regarding academic honors. Her voice was steady, professional. She explained that the university had concluded its investigation into concerns raised earlier in the term. She spoke about process, about review, about integrity. She did not raise her voice. She did not name names immediately. Then she explained that the investigation had identified unauthorized access and manipulation of academic materials, that metadata, access logs, and version histories had confirmed this, that an anonymous report initiating the review had been traced to a campus network associated with the same individual responsible for those edits. She turned slightly and addressed Lydia directly. Lydia Moore was asked to step away from the podium. For a moment, nothing happened. Lydia stood frozen, her hands still gripping her notes. Her eyes flicked toward Dr. Brooks, then out toward the audience. Confusion crossed her face first, then something closer to disbelief. Someone in the audience shifted. A cough echoed too loudly in the quiet. Lydia gathered her papers with trembling hands and stepped back. She did not speak. She did not cry.
She walked off the stage under the weight of silence that felt heavier than any accusation. No one applauded. No one reacted at all. The hall held its breath. Dr. Brooks continued. She explained that the valedictorian designation had been restored to its rightful recipient following the findings. She paused, then spoke my name. Naomi Carter. I felt it before I heard it, a subtle shift in the air, heads turning. My heart beat once, hard, then steadied. For a brief second, I considered staying seated. The instinct surprised me. Standing felt like an ending, and I was not sure I was ready to claim it. Then I stood. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. I focused on the floor, on placing one foot in front of the other. I did not look for Lydia. I did not look for my mom. When I reached the stage, Dr. Brooks nodded at me. There was no flourish, no gesture inviting applause. This was not a performance. She handed me the honor cord quietly. Our hands brushed. She leaned in just enough to say something only I could hear. You handled this with restraint. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. There was no speech. Not yet. The program moved on, seamlessly, as if the interruption had been part of the plan all along. That was the most surreal part. The institution absorbed the shock and continued forward. I returned to my seat. My hands shook slightly now, the adrenaline catching up to me. I folded them again, breathing slowly, counting the seconds until the tremor passed. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. The rest of the ceremony blurred together, names called, diplomas conferred, applause rising and falling in waves. I watched students cross the stage, faces lit with relief and pride. At some point, I realized I was smiling, not because I had won anything, but because something inside of me had closed a door. When the ceremony ended, people stood and began to move. Conversations resumed. The spell broke. My mom found me near the aisle. She pulled me into a hug that was both fierce and controlled. "I am proud of you," she said. I nodded into her shoulder. We did not talk about Lydia. We did not need to. As we walked out of the hall into the afternoon sun, I glanced back once at the stage. It looked ordinary again, just wood and lights and microphones. The truth had spoken. It had not needed my voice. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground under my feet hold steady.
Chapter 5. What I won was never the title. Stability did not mean relief. It meant the shaking had stopped long enough for me to notice what was left behind. The days after graduation moved more slowly than I expected. Campus emptied out in waves. Families returned home. Decorations came down. The auditorium doors stayed closed. What had felt monumental a week earlier was already becoming a memory the university was ready to file away. I finished packing my room in the same quiet way I had finished the semester, box by box, book by book. My mom helped when she could, handing me tape, folding clothes, asking small questions that did not press too hard. We both understood that closure did not arrive on schedule. News traveled without drama. I heard about Lydia through administrative emails and careful phrasing. Her scholarship had been revoked. $48,000 across 4 years disappeared with a single notice. Her academic record was updated to reflect a violation of integrity standards. No spectacle, no public statement, just consequences that would follow her into every application and interview. I did not feel satisfaction when I learned this. I felt a dull heaviness. Karma, I was learning, was rarely cinematic. It was procedural. It was permanent. A week later, I received an email that surprised me more than anything else had. It was from Olivia Grant, a graduate admissions advisor I had spoken with months earlier. At the time, the conversation had been brief and practical. We had discussed programs, prerequisites, timelines. I had assumed my candidacy would rise or fall with my academic honors. Her message asked if we could talk.
We met over video on a quiet afternoon. Olivia's tone was warm but focused. She did not mention Lydia. She did not mention the investigation directly. She said she had followed the situation closely. She said what stood out to her was not the outcome, but the process. She said my decision to let the review unfold without escalation mattered, that my documentation had been thorough, that my communication had been measured, that the way I handled pressure said more about my readiness for graduate study than any title ever could. She told me I had been accepted into the program, not provisionally, fully. I closed my laptop and sat there for a long time after the call ended. I did not cry. I did not laugh. I let the moment settle. The valedictorian speech came later that week, during the smaller departmental ceremony. Less crowded, more intimate. I stood at the podium with my notes in front of me and took a breath. I did not talk about betrayal. I did not explain what happened. I talked about discipline, about patience, about the difference between recognition and worth. I said that integrity was not proven when things were easy. It was proven when silence felt risky. I said that not every victory needed to be loud to be real. I saw heads nodding. I saw some eyes glance away. I spoke anyway. Afterward, people approached me quietly. A professor thanked me for my restraint. A classmate admitted they had doubted me. Another said they had learned something they did not expect to learn at graduation. Lydia was not there. I thought about her less than I thought I would. When she crossed my mind, it was not with anger. It was with a sense of distance. Whatever she had been chasing was no longer in my path. On my last day on campus, my mom and I took one final walk through the quad. The trees were fully green now. Benches sat empty. It felt like a place returning to itself. She asked me if I felt like everything had worked out. I told her it had worked through. That night, back in our apartment, I sat on my bed surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and opened my journal. I wrote about what I had lost. I wrote about what I had gained. I wrote about the version of myself that had been tested and the version that remained. I did not write Lydia's name. If you have ever been misjudged in silence, if you have ever watched someone benefit from your patience while you paid the cost of waiting, you might understand what I learned. Revenge does not always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like letting the truth arrive on its own schedule. I did not win because I stood on a stage. I won because I did not become someone I would not recognize. If this story resonated with you, if you have faced a moment where silence felt like surrender but turned out to be strength, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share what you would have done or what you learned the hard way. I am still moving forward, and I am still choosing who I become.